The rifle was already pointed at Cole Hardin's chest before he got both feet through the gate. He stood still. Dust settled around his boots. The woman holding the gun had arms that didn't shake and eyes that had been deciding things for a long time before he arrived. "You're on Raleigh land," she said. "I know it," he said. "I came to ask for work." Her name was Nora Raleigh. She was 29 years old, the last of a cattle family that had run 40,000 acres of Arizona territory before the drought came and took half the herd and both her brothers and her father inside of 3 years. The house behind her was still standing. Barely. The fields behind the house were dry as chalk. She had 11 head of cattle left and a foreman named Dale who was 3 weeks into drinking himself into a ditch. She did not lower the rifle. "There's no money," she said. "I didn't ask for money." That stopped her. Not the words. The calm in them. She looked at him the way a person looks at something that doesn't fit the shape of what they expected, trying to figure out which category to put it in. Cole Hardin was not a large man, but he was built like something that had been tested and had not broken. His jacket was patched at both elbows. His hat had a dent in the brim that hadn't come from carelessness. He was holding his horse's reins in one hand and a rolled canvas pack in the other. And he was standing in the heat like he had nowhere else to be and no particular feeling about it. "Then what do you want?" she said. "3 meals and a roof. I'll work whatever needs working." Nora Raleigh had sent away 4 men this month. 2 of them had been sent away with a rifle. One of them had made the mistake of looking at the house like he was calculating its worth. The 4th one had looked at her the way men sometimes looked at a woman alone on a failing property. Like she was part of what was available for the taking. Cole Hardin was not looking at her like any of those things. He was looking at her like she was the person making the decision, and he was waiting on it. She lowered the rifle. Not all the way. Just enough. "The bunkhouse leaks," she said. "I've slept wet before. The cattle are in poor condition. I've worked poor condition before. I don't need conversation," she said. "I don't need opinions. I need the fence line on the north pasture repaired and the water trough cleared before the heat gets worse." "Yes, ma'am." She hated that. The ma'am. It made her feel like a widow, which she wasn't, or an old woman, which she also wasn't. She was neither of those things. She was just a woman who had run out of good options and was down to bad ones. "Bunkhouse is around back," she said. "Don't touch anything in the main house. Don't speak to me unless the work requires it." He nodded once and walked his horse around the side of the building without another word. Nora stood in the yard for a moment after he was gone. The heat pressed down on everything. A crow landed on the fence post near the gate and stared at nothing. She went back inside and did not watch him through the window. She made herself not. The north fence was worse than she had told him. 3 sections were down completely, and the posts had rotted at the base from a wet spring 2 years ago that the current drought had decided to punish them for retroactively. Cole walked the full line first, all 4 miles of it, before he touched a single post. He made notes on a torn scrap of paper he kept in his jacket pocket, measured the breaks, counted what was salvageable. Dale the foreman found him on the 2nd mile. Dale was red-faced and unhappy and smelled like a man who had been losing an argument with a bottle for some time. "Who hired you?" Dale said. It was not a question. "Miss Raleigh." "Miss Raleigh doesn't hire without telling me." "I expect she's telling you now," Cole said, without looking up from the post he was examining. Dale stood there a moment, waiting for something he could be angry about. Cole didn't give him anything. He just kept working, pulling the rotten post out of the ground, turning it over in his hands, setting it aside. Dale left. By the water trough, Cole found what he'd half expected. The pipe feeding from the holding tank had a crack packed with old clay that someone had tried to use as a patch. It had held through winter. The summer heat had split it. Fixing it the right way meant pulling the pipe and soldering the section, which meant he needed tools he did not have, and a trip to town. He went to the house and knocked at the back door. Nora opened it. She had flour on her hands, which she was clearly annoyed about him seeing. "The trough pipe needs soldering," he said. "I need a trip to town for supplies. I can make a list." "How much?" she said. He told her. She went still for a moment, or the way people go still when they are doing math they don't want to do in front of someone else. "I'll go myself," she said. "I can go." "I said I'll go myself." She wiped her hands on a cloth and looked at him steadily. "Make the list." He made the list. Short, specific, no waste. She read it without comment and went to get her coat. He watched her ride out in the buckboard, sitting straight and alone against the flat white sky, and thought that whoever had left her to this had no idea what they had left behind. The fence line took him 4 days. He worked from the first light until the light was gone. He ate what was left for him on the back step, never in the house. He did not ask questions. He repaired what could be repaired and replaced what could not. And on the morning of the 5th day, he brought her the bad post sections in a stack and pointed out which ones had been structurally compromised below the soil line, which meant the rot was likely to spread to the neighboring posts within the season. She looked at the stack of wood, then at him. "How many more?" she said. 12 sections, maybe 14. She said nothing for a long moment. "Do you know cattle?" she said. "Yes." "Do you know anything about breeding?" she said. And her voice changed on that word in a way she had no intention of it changing, something pulling tight underneath it, like a wire under too much tension. "Yes, ma'am," he said. She turned and walked back toward the house. "The herd is in the south pasture," she said over her shoulder. "Tell me what you see." He went to look. And what he saw in that south pasture was the beginning of something he could not have named yet. A sense that this land was not finished, that the woman who owned it was not finished, that whatever had been broken here was broken in the specific way that things break just before someone decides to fix them. He stood in the south pasture in the late afternoon light and looked at 11 head of cattle on a property that had once held 800. And something in his chest that had been quiet for a very long time made a sound. Nora Raleigh had not slept more than 4 hours at a stretch in 7 months. This was not a complaint. She had no one to complain to. It was simply a fact that lived in her body the way all her current facts lived there, as weight, not as a permanent low-grade ache behind the eyes, as the particular quality of silence that fills a house where there used to be more people. She was awake before Cole Hardin was, which meant she saw him come out of the bunkhouse before sunrise and walk to the south pasture carrying nothing but a canteen and that small scrap of paper he was always writing on. He did not know she was watching from the kitchen window. She told herself she was watching to make sure he wasn't taking anything. She did not examine that explanation very hard. He spent 2 hours in the south pasture before breakfast, moving through the cattle slowly, not in a hurry, not performing a task, but reading one. She had seen her father move through a herd that way. It was not something you could fake. Dale did not come out of the bunkhouse until the sun was well up. He came out in the same clothes he'd worn the day before, and he walked to the water pump and stood over it a long time before he used it. Nora watched him from the window too, but differently. She watched Dale the way you watch something you already know the ending of. She had kept Dale because he had been her father's foreman for 11 years. She had kept him through the grief and through the drinking and through the months when he was useless and she was doing both their jobs. She had kept him because letting him go felt like admitting her father was truly gone. And there was no version of Raleigh land left that her father would recognize. She was running out of reasons. Cole came to the back door at 8. She handed him a plate and coffee without being asked. He ate standing at the back step, looking out at the land. When he was finished, he said, "The bull is the problem." She stiffened. "What do you mean?" "The bull you've got in the south pasture. He's 7 years old at least, maybe 8. He's not breeding anymore. He looks like he is, but he isn't. That's why your herd isn't growing." Nora set down her coffee cup very carefully. She had known this. She had known it for months, in the back part of her mind, where she put the things that cost too much to fix. The bull had been her father's prize animal. Getting rid of him felt like the last door closing, and a new breeding bull cost money she did not have. "What do you suggest?" she said. And her voice was flat because she was working to keep it that way. "There's a man named Aldous Pike in the county. Runs a small operation south of Yuma. He has young bulls and he's in debt. He might be open to an arrangement." "What kind of arrangement?" "Grazing rights on the east section in exchange for stud service and 2 calves in the spring." She looked at him. "You know Aldous Pike." "I know of him." "And you know my east section?" "I walked it yesterday evening." She did not say anything for a moment. The crow was back on the fence post. It had become a habit, that bird. "You walked my land without my permission," she said. "Yes," he said simply. Any other man she would have sent away for that alone. She stood with the coffee cup in her hand, and the crow on the post, and the flat morning light coming down on everything. And she thought about what it meant that he had walked her land, and then come to her with a plan instead of a price. "Write down what you know about Pike," she said. "I'll think on it." He wrote it on the scrap of paper and left it on the step and went back to the fence line. Dale came to her at noon. He had been drinking again, or still, she wasn't sure which. He stood in the kitchen doorway with his hat in his hands and a particular expression on his face that she had learned to read as the prelude to a grievance. "That man you hired," Dale said. "Cole Hardin. He's been talking to the hands." "We have 2 hands, Dale." "Barely. He told Pete the fence method we've been using is wrong. Told him we've been wasting wire." "Have we been wasting wire?" she said. Dale's jaw moved. "That's not the point. That seems like exactly the point." He put his hat back on. That was always the end of a conversation with Dale. The hat going back on meant he was done talking, which meant he had said what he came to say, and now he would go back to losing to the bottle, and the day would continue. "He's not what he looks like," Dale said from the doorway. "Man who works for nothing and asks for nothing is either running from something or wants something he hasn't named yet." Nora said nothing. Dale left. She thought about it through the afternoon. She thought about it while she went over the account books for the 3rd time, looking for numbers that were not going to change. She thought about it while she fed the horses and checked the water trough, which was holding now the soldered pipe clean and tight. She did not think he was running. She had seen running. Her father had run from the grief of her mother's death for 6 years before the land claimed him. Her brothers had run from the responsibility of the land in their different ways. One to California and one to a bottle much like Dale's. She knew running. It had a particular quality of absence, a way of being somewhere without being there. Cole Hardin was entirely present. That was what she could not put a name to, the simple fact of his presence, the way he occupied space without demanding anything from it. She was at the fence post near the east pasture gate at dusk, checking the new wire, when she heard him coming back from the far section. She did not turn around. She kept her hands on the wire and her eyes on the work. He stopped a few feet away. "Pike will deal," he said. "I spoke with a man in town who knows him. He's more desperate than I thought. You could get 3 calves and exclusive service through next spring." She turned then. The light was going orange behind him, and she had to shade her eyes. "You went to town," she said. "On my own time, on my own horse. And you made inquiries on my behalf without asking." "I got information," he said. "What you do with it is yours." She studied him in the failing light. There was dust on his jacket and a new cut on his left hand that he had wrapped with a strip of canvas and not mentioned. He had worked 16 hours today. She knew because she had watched. "Why?" she said. He looked at her straight. "Because the land is good," he said, "and what's happening to it isn't right." She turned back to the fence wire. "I'll write to Pike tomorrow," she said. She walked back to the house and did not look behind her and put her hand flat on the kitchen table when she got inside because she needed to feel something solid, and that was the closest solid thing. The crow was gone from the fence post. The evening was coming in purple and quiet across the flats. Somewhere in the south pasture, one of the 11 cattle made a low sound that carried a long way in the cooling air. She thought, 3 calves in the spring. She thought, if. The letter to Aldous Pike came back in 9 days, with a yes scratched at the bottom in handwriting that looked like a man trying to make a decision before he changed his mind. Nora Raleigh read it twice, folded it, set it on the table, and allowed herself exactly 30 seconds of something that felt adjacent to relief. And then she put it in the drawer with the account books and went back to work. Cole had the fence line finished, all 14 compromise sections replaced, posts set properly, wires strung at the right tension. She had walked it herself on the 3rd day and not found a thing to criticize, which annoyed her in a way she did not examine. He had started on the barn roof without being asked. She came out one morning to find him up there with a bucket of pitch and a calm expression, moving across the damaged sections like a man who had decided the job needed doing, and that was the end of the thinking about it. "I didn't tell you to do that," she said from the yard. "No," he agreed, from the roof. She went back inside. She told herself she would say something about it later. She did not. Dale's situation resolved itself on a Tuesday. She found him behind the equipment shed, not drunk this time, just sitting in the dirt with his back against the wall and his hat over his face. And when she came around the corner, he looked up at her with the eyes of a man who had finally run out of argument. "I can't do this anymore, Nora," he said. She had known it was coming. She had known it for months. It still sat on her chest like a boot heel. "I know," she said. "I'm not the man your father hired. I haven't been for a while." "No." He turned his hat over in his hands. "Hardin's better than me. Has been since the first day." She did not argue with him. That would have been a cruelty to argue with a true thing just to make someone feel better. She paid him what she had, which was not enough. And he rode out on a Wednesday morning before the sun was full up. She watched him go from the porch and did not feel what she expected to feel, which was grief. She felt instead a strange lightness, like a window opening in a room that had been closed too long. Cole was at the barn when she told him. "You're the foreman now," she said. "Same terms." He looked up from the hinge he was repairing. "Same terms meaning no pay." "Same terms meaning room and board," she said. "When the calves come and I have something to sell, we talk about wages. He considered this. Not the way a man considers a bad deal, but the way a man considers a commitment. All right, he said. She went back to the house. She made 2 cups of coffee and brought one back to the barn and set it on the workbench without a word and went back to her accounts. Pike arrived with the bull on a Friday, and then driving a battered wagon with a young hand and an expression of a man fulfilling an obligation he was mildly embarrassed about. The bull was a good animal, 3 years old, deep-chested, with the easy confidence of a creature that had never had a reason to doubt itself. Cole handled the introduction to the herd. Nora watched from the fence. She had always loved this part of ranching, the pure animal logic of it. The way the herd sorted itself and made room, the way the new bull walked through like he had simply been delayed and was now here to do what he came to do. Pike stood next to her at the fence. He was a small, dry man with a sunburned neck and the careful eyes of someone who had been in business long enough to know that a handshake is only as good as the character behind it. "Your man Hardin?" Pike said, without preamble. "Was how long you had him?" 3 weeks, she said. Pike watched the bull moving through the herd. "He brokered a fair deal for you. Could have gotten more out of me if he'd pushed." "I know," she said. Pike glanced at her sideways. "You trust him?" She looked at Cole across the pasture, working the gate, moving easy and quiet through the cattle. "I trust his work," she said carefully. Pike nodded like that was the smart answer, and also like he thought there might be more to say about it that neither of them was going to say. That night, after Pike had gone, Nora sat on the porch in the cooling dark and tried to do the math again. 3 calves in the spring, the fence solid, the barn roof holding, a bull in the south pasture doing the work that needed doing. It was not enough yet. It was far from enough. But it was something. And Cole came around the side of the house and stopped when he saw her. He had been on his way to the bunkhouse. He stood there a moment, not awkward exactly, but aware. "Sit if you want," she said, surprising herself. He sat on the step below the porch. Not close, not performing distance either, just sitting. "My father built this porch," she said after a while. He said nothing, just listened. "He built the whole house. Him and my uncle and 2 men from town. Took 3 weeks. My mother sat in a tent the whole time and complained about the dust." She stopped. She loved it when it was done. She said it was the most beautiful house she'd ever lived in. She paused again. I think she had only lived in 2 houses. Cole made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was in that neighborhood. "The land is good," he said. "No, you were right to hold it." She looked out at the dark of the flat land, the stars coming hard and bright above it. "Everyone told me to sell," she said. "After my father died, after my brothers left, everyone said it was too much for one woman." He didn't say anything to that, didn't argue with it or agree with it, just let it be what it was. She went inside 20 minutes later without ceremony. She did not say good night. He did not expect her to. But she lay awake in her bed in the house her father built and looked at the ceiling and thought about the south pasture, about 11 cattle becoming more, about a fence line holding, about a man on her porch step looking at the stars like he was somewhere he had meant to be. She did not name what she was thinking about. But the morning came easier than it had in a long time. The rains came late in September, the way they sometimes did in the territory. Not a polite rain, but a serious one. 3 days of it, hammering the flat land and filling the gullies and turning the roads into something between mud and intention. Nora and Cole spent those 3 days in the barn, working by lamplight, fixing the equipment that had been waiting for a dry stretch and an excuse. The barn was tight now, the roof sealed, the lamplight steady. Rain on a sealed roof has a particular sound. She had almost forgotten it. They did not talk much. They didn't need to. She had noticed this about him, the way silence was not uncomfortable in his presence, the way the work filled the space between them in a way that words would have only crowded. On the second evening of rain, he found the old saddle. It was in the back corner of the barn, under a canvas, her father's saddle, the good one with the silver trim that her father had bought himself as a prize after the herd hit 500 head. She had put it under the canvas 3 years ago, when she couldn't look at it anymore, and she had not touched it since. Cole pulled the canvas back without knowing what he was looking at. He ran his hand over the leather, seeing the quality of it. Then he looked up and saw her face. He put the canvas back. "Sorry," he said. "Don't be," she said, and her voice was steadier than she expected. She crossed to the corner and pulled the canvas back herself. The silver trim had gone dark with neglect. The leather was dry and starting to crack at the edges. She ran her thumb along the seat. "He won it in a bet," she said, "from a rancher in Tucson. The rancher bet him he couldn't ride out a particular horse, and he rode it for 40 minutes. She looked at the cracking leather. "He never told my mother how he got it. He said he bought it, and she believed him because she never thought he was the kind of man who would bet." Cole watched her. "He was exactly that kind of man," she said. "He bet on everything. The land, the cattle, the weather. He bet on my brothers when they were useless, and he bet on me when everyone else was advising against it." She smoothed her hand across the leather. "I suppose I owe him for that." She carried the saddle to the workbench and found the leather oil and started working it back into the hide. Cole picked up a cloth and helped without being asked. They worked on the saddle together for an hour. The rain came down on the tight roof. The lamp burned steady. Her hands worked the oil into the silver trim until it began to come back, gray to bright, the horse and rider design emerging from the tarnish like something that had just been waiting. She did not cry. She had cried for her father already, in private, in the specific middle of the night when crying did not cost anything, because no one was watching. She had used up that particular grief. What she felt now was different. It was the feeling of a thing being tended instead of lost. When the saddle was done, she set it on the rack and looked at it. Bright and clean and cracked slightly at the left edge of the seat, but holding. "There's something I should tell you," Cole said. She looked at him. He was still looking at the saddle. "I'm not a drifter," he said. "I mean, I have been. But I left a situation to come here. A bad one." He paused. "There's a man named Orrin Doyle in New Mexico. I worked his land for 2 years. When I left, he said I owed him wages I'd already earned, and he put it around that I was a thief." She waited. "I'm not a thief," he said. "I know that," she said. He looked at her then, not with surprise exactly, but with attention. "Doyle has a reach," he said. "He's the kind of man who makes things difficult from a distance. I don't think he'll come here. But if he does, I want you to know the shape of it before it arrives." She thought about this. She thought about Dale's words, months ago now. A man who wants nothing and asks for nothing is either running from something or wants something he hasn't named. "Are you still running?" she said. The rain hit the roof. The lamp moved slightly in a draft from the barn door. "No," he said. "I don't think I am." She picked up her lamp and walked to the barn door and looked out at the rain coming down hard on the mud yard. "Then stay and work," she said. I'll deal with Oren Doyle if he comes. She heard him behind her, not moving, absorbing that. You would do that, he said. It was not quite a question. This is Raleigh land, she said. I deal with what comes onto it. The rain eased toward morning. She lay in her bed and listened to it tapering off into something gentler. A quiet rain, a finishing rain. And she thought about Cole Hardin in the bunkhouse and Oren Doyle in New Mexico and her father's saddle cleaned and sitting on the rack and the bull in the south pasture and the calves that were coming in the spring. Nor, she thought, everything that is still here chose to stay. She slept until sunrise. When she woke, the sky was a clean, hard blue, and the land was dark with water and smelling of sage and wet earth and possibility. Cole was already at the south pasture gate, standing in the morning light, watching the herd. She stood at the kitchen window and watched him watch the cattle. The crow was not on the fence post. It had not been there in several weeks. She thought that might mean something, but she was not the kind of woman who let herself lean on signs. She put on her boots and went out to meet the day. Oren Doyle arrived on a dry Thursday morning at the end of October, which was not when Nora had expected him, but was also not a surprise because men like Oren Doyle operated on their own schedule and called it business. He came with 2 riders, which was one more than he needed for a peaceful conversation and one fewer than he would need if things went the way he probably hoped they would. Nora was at the gate when they rode up, because she had been expecting this visit in one form or another since Cole had told her the shape of it. And she had decided that meeting it at the gate was better than waiting. Doyle was 50 or thereabouts, broad through the shoulders, with the well-fed look of a man who had built his comfort on other people's labor. He had pleasant eyes, which she did not trust. "This Raleigh land?" he said, looking past her. "It is," she said. "I'm looking for a man named Cole Hardin. I believe he may be in your employ." "He's my foreman," she said. Doyle smiled. "Then you should know that your foreman left New Mexico owing me wages for supplies he received and did not pay for." "I know what you told people he did," she said. "That's not the same thing." Doyle's pleasant eyes went a little less pleasant. She had spent the past 3 weeks preparing for this conversation. She had written to a man in Albuquerque who ran a mercantile that Doyle used. She had written to a county clerk in Dona Ana. She had written to 2 men who had worked Doyle's land before Cole and who had left under similar accusations. She had the letters in her jacket pocket. She took them out. "The clerk in Dona Ana has records of Hardin's wages earned and not paid over a period of 19 months, she said. "The mercantile in Albuquerque has records showing the supplies you charged to Hardin's account without his authorization. And I have 2 signed statements from men who left your employment under the same accusations you're currently making about my foreman." Doyle looked at the letters. Behind him, his 2 riders were very still. "This is ranch business," Doyle said, and his voice had gone careful. "Between me and Hardin." "You brought it to my gate," she said. "That made it Raleigh business." Cole came around the side of the house. He had seen the riders from the south pasture. He stood off to her left, not in front of her, not behind her. Doyle looked at him. Something passed between the 2 men that Nora did not try to read. "You made a mistake leaving," Doyle said to Cole. "I made a lot of mistakes staying," Cole said. Doyle looked at the letters in Nora's hand again. Then he looked at her. The calculation behind his pleasant eyes was visible now, running its numbers. "I could take this to the territorial court," he said. "You could," she said. "And I would file the Dona Ana records and the Albuquerque receipts and the 2 signed statements and let a judge look at all of it together." She paused. "I would enjoy that," Doyle sat on his horse for a moment in the hard October sun. Then he turned without another word and rode back through the gate with his two riders behind him. She waited until the dust settled. Cole was quiet beside her. "You did that before I got here?" he said. "I did it when you told me the shape of it," she said. "I'm not in the habit of waiting for trouble to arrive before I prepare for it." He looked at her. She had gotten used to the quality of his attention by now, the way he looked at a thing straight. "Nora," he said, and it was the first time he had used her name. She felt it the way you feel a change in the weather before you see it, a pressure shift, a different quality in the air. "The calves are going to be good in the spring," she said, because she needed to say something that was not about what was happening in the air between them. "Yes," he said. He was still looking at her. "The east section needs work before the cold comes," she said. "I know it." "I thought we could discuss a wage," she said. "A real one. The accounts are not what they were, but they're not what they were 2 months ago either." He nodded slowly, and there was something in his expression that was almost humor. The kind of humor that knows it is being redirected and does not mind, because the other thing will wait. "All right," he said. They walked back toward the house. Not close. The appropriate distance of two people who were business partners, and nothing more. At the porch steps, she stopped. "Thank you," she said, "for telling me about Doyle, for giving me time to prepare." "Thank you," he said, "for preparing." She went up the porch steps and through the front door, which she almost never used, and stood in the front hallway in the quiet house, and put her back against the cool wall and closed her eyes for exactly 10 seconds. Then she opened them and went to her desk and started on the east section plans. November came in cold and clear. The herd was eating well. The fence held. The barn roof held through the first hard frost. On a Sunday, for no reason she examined closely, she took her father's saddle down from the rack and cleaned it again and set it near the front door. Cole saw it there one morning when he came to report on the cattle. He looked at it. He looked at her. He did not say anything. She did not explain. But later that day she saddled her own horse and rode the fence line of the east section. And for the first time in 2 years, she felt the land under her as something hers, fully hers, in the bone-deep way her father had always meant when he talked about what land really meant. She rode back in the late afternoon, and Cole was at the gate. He opened it for her. She rode through. And that, for now, was everything. And also the beginning. There were 3 calves born in February, 2 heifers and a bull calf, all of them strong. Nora was there for the first one, alone in the south pasture at 4 in the morning in the cold dark, the way her father had always been there for the first birth of the season, because he said the land needed you to witness its beginnings if you wanted it to trust you with the rest. She had her hands in her jacket pockets, and her breath came out in white clouds, and the mother worked in the cold grass, and the calf arrived wet and blinking, and immediately determined. The way new things are always determined before the world has a chance to tell them the odds. Cole was there by the time the second calf came. He had seen her light moving across the pasture and followed it. He stood a few feet away in the dark without speaking. They watched the second birth together, and then the third, and by the time the sky was going gray in the east, they had 3 calves standing on uncertain legs in the south pasture. And a herd that was, for the first time in 3 years, growing. She looked at those 3 calves and thought, 14 sections of fence, a soldered pipe, a cleaned saddle, a letter to a county clerk, a man who walked 4 miles of fence line before he touched a single post. This was what rebuilding looked like. Not a single large thing. 100 small, true things in a row. "We need to talk about the spring plan," she said. "Yes," he said. They walked back toward the house in the first gray light, the cold pasture grass crunching under their boots, the new calves behind them growing steadier by the minute. At the house she made coffee, and they sat at the kitchen table with the account books and the pasture maps and planned the season. She had her father's way of planning, systematic, with contingencies. No wishful thinking. Cole had a rancher's way of listening, absorbing the plan and finding the gaps without ego about it. They worked for 2 hours. By the end, there was a spring plan on paper that was not conservative and was not reckless and was based on the land as it was and what it could reasonably become. She put her hands flat on the table and looked at it. "It's enough to start," she said. He looked at the plan. "It's enough to build on," he said. She looked up at him then. He was already looking at her, had been for a moment, just with that straight quality of attention that had unsettled her from the first day, and that she had stopped trying to unsit. She thought about her father betting on things. She thought about the saddle in the front hall. She thought about 11 cattle becoming 3 more and more on the way, and a fence line holding in the frost. She thought about what it meant to bet on something. "Stay through the fall," she said. "See what the herd does. We'll talk about the rest of it then." "The rest of it," he said carefully. "The rest of the arrangement," she said. "What it becomes." He held her gaze. "All right," he said. She stood and picked up the coffee cups and went to the sink. And she was aware of him behind her at the table, the fact of him. In the simple present weight of a person she had come to count on, in the specific way you come to count on something honest. "Hardin," she said, with her back to him. "Yes." "The east section needs a second windmill. I want to plan it this week." "Yes, ma'am." She did not tell him to stop calling her that. She was almost used to it now. Outside, the February sun was coming up over Raleigh land, pale and new, throwing long shadows across the frost-white grass, making the whole flat world look like something that had been waiting a long time for the right people to wake up in it. The 3 calves stood in the south pasture and did not know yet what they were part of. Nora Raleigh knew. Cole Hardin knew. And the land, which had been keeping its own counsel all along, held them both without comment, the way good land always does, patient and permanent and full of what it might yet become.